Imagine for a moment a landmark known around the globe, an architectural marvel stretching thousands of miles. The Great Wall of China.
Instantly recognizable.
Exactly. For centuries we've had this story, right?
Yeah.
A massive defense built over millennia, keeping out northern nomads. It's history as we know it.
It's the textbook version.
But what if a lot of what we think we know about history, including this huge iconic structure, is just wrong, profoundly mistaken?
It's a big what if.
It is. And today, we're doing a deep dive into exactly that possibility. We're looking at the new chronology, a really controversial theory from two Russian mathematicians, Anatoly Fomenko and Gleb Nosovskiy.
Controversial is maybe putting it mildly for some.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
Our mission here is to unpack their, frankly, astonishing claims, especially about early Chinese history and, yes, the Great Wall. We'll explore their methods, which are interesting, and also the big criticisms they face.
Right. So you, the listener, can get a quick handle on what this radical reinterpretation is all about.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have Anatoly Fomenko. He's a full member of the Russian Academy of Sciences, and his colleague Gleb Nosovskiy, also a PhD in physics and math.
So serious academic credentials in their fields.
Right, and they propose this new chronology. The core idea, really, is that a huge chunk of what we call ancient history isn't original. It's repetitions, maybe even fabrications.
Yeah, that's the gist. Phantom duplicates, they sometimes call them.
So with claims that bold, what's the foundation? Where do they even start building this alternative history?
Well, they start with early Chinese history, specifically everything before, say, the 15th century AD. Their claim is that it's not actually Chinese history at all.
Not Chinese. Then what is it?
They argue it's basically a transplanted version of European and Mediterranean history, particularly Byzantium.
Transplanted, like moved.
Kind of. The idea is that historical chronicles from Europe were brought to China maybe much later and then misinterpreted as local history. It's like finding blueprints for a Roman villa in China and assuming the Romans built it there.
Wow. Okay, that's quite a claim. What's the reasoning? How do they justify that?
They begin by pointing to what they see as huge complexities in the Chinese historical sources themselves, like translating names.
How so?
Well, they argue that European or Christian names, say Joseph or George, when transcribed into Chinese hieroglyphs becoming something like Yasumu or Kalichizi, they become totally unrecognizable.
Ah, okay, so a familiar story might look completely alien, completely Chinese, just because of the names.
That's their argument. And they also talk about how hieroglyphs themselves are interpreted.
Right, the meaning isn't always fixed.
Exactly. The meaning, even how you pronounce an old name now, they say it depends on who wrote it. Language changes, big reforms, like 20th century changes made older symbols really hard to read.
So it's like a linguistic puzzle where pieces got lost or maybe forced to fit.
Kind of. They argue this created a kind of chaos in the sources. They even point to mainstream historians like Vasiliev mentioning gaps and inaccuracies, or Gumilev calling the chronicles incredibly complex.
Okay, so complexity is known, but Fomenko takes it further.
Much further. They argue this chaos happened because 17th, 18th century translators just couldn't figure out the old text, so they had to add commentary, guess, fill gaps, creating these huge, confusing chronicles.
So the act of trying to understand history actually changed it, in their view.
Precisely. The interpretation becomes the history. That's key to their whole model.
Which leads them, I guess, to these claims about historical parallelisms, these duplicates.
Yes, this is where it gets really interesting, or maybe strange, depending on your view. They claim massive overlaps.
Okay, give us an example.
They look at pre-10th century AD. They say ancient Chinese history mirrors what they call phantom Roman history, meaning Roman events mistakenly placed in China.
Phantom Roman history.
Yeah, like ghosts of Roman events showing up in Chinese records.
Yeah.
They say there aren't time shifts here, just messed up names and geography.
Okay, like what?
Take the Han Empire, 1st century BC. They see it as a parallel to the Roman Empire. Sulla, Caesar, Augustus, both seeking big influence, spreading culture.
In the timeline.
They point out the Han decline, dated 220 AD, is almost identical to Rome's crisis period, just a 3-year difference. Both eras had these soldier emperors.
Oh, okay. Any others?
Oh, yeah. A Chinese empress after the Han collapse, paralleled with Julia Mesa in Rome, 3rd century AD, then 4th century China, a war against the Tanguts.
Tanguts.
Fomenko identifies them as Goths. He parallels this war with Rome fighting Goths in the Balkans.
Wait, Goths in China? How do they explain that linguistically?
They argued the Chinese Liang Empire could be read as Roman Empire because R and L sounds could be interchangeable in some dialects. A bit of a stretch for some, but that's the claim.
And the geography.
The division of the Chinese steppe into West and East mirrors the Roman Empire's split, and the fall of Western Liang in 420 AD to Huns.
Parallels Western Rome falling in 476 AD to Germans and Goths.
Exactly. And they note both had really young last emperors. They even use Gumilev again, who noted the striking coincidence of Huns being wiped out simultaneously in Asia and Europe. Fomenko says, see, phantom European chronicles superimposed.
Yeah. Certainly a pattern they're drawing. Does this continue into later periods?
Absolutely. Moving into the 10th to 14th centuries, they see a Chinese Dark Age, 860-960 AD, as just an artificial joint, like editors patching timelines together.
An artificial joint.
Yeah, just papering over gaps, basically. Then the Khitan conquest of China in 946 AD, they parallel that with Alexander the Great's conquest. Similarities in the conqueror adopting local ways, the empire falling apart quickly after his death.
Alexander the Great in 10th century China.
That's the claim. And it gets wilder. They claim Christian baptism happened in China in the 10th century, among certain nomadic groups.
Christian baptism in China back then.
Yes, mirroring Russia's baptism around the same time. They even connect it to the European legend of Prester John, saying he's a reflection of John the Baptist.
Okay, my head's spinning a bit. Keep going.
Then, 11th century China, Prince Yuanhao declares himself Son of Heaven in 1038 AD.
Let me guess. Paralleled with Jesus Christ.
You got it.
Right.
Associated with a change in the calendar system, too. And the First Crusade, 1096 AD.
Where does that show up?
Reflected in Chinese history around 1082 AD. They even identified the city Kaifeng as the capital of the Roman Empire.
The Roman Empire based in Kaifeng.
According to them, yes. And the Fourth Crusade, early 1200s, paralleled with a Jurchen attack on Kaifeng around 1125 AD. They consistently find the slight time shift, about 100 years, with the Chinese dates appearing older.
It's a consistent pattern they claim to see, this
Right.
100-year offset. And what about the people? You mentioned Goths.
Right. The European nations on the Chinese arena claim it's not just Goths, the Huns appearing in both China and Europe. They say that's just one group written down as to a paper bifurcation.
Okay.
They identify the Xianbi people as Serbs. The Tanguts, as we said, Tangots or Dongoths. Cossacks, noting Chinese sources, describe their Caucasian feature.
Caucasian features.
Yeah, things like beards, non-East Asian traits. They also say Tartars and Turks are described in ancient China, even split into three groups, white, black, wild, just like Russia's great blue and white hordes.
This is rewriting ethnicity on a massive scale.
It keeps going. The Shiwei people in North China. Swedes, they say. The Khitans. Macedonians, neighbors of the Serbs whose language was supposedly the prototype for Church Slavonic. The Cheshi people, European Czechs.
Swedes, Czechs, Macedonians, in ancient China.
That's the interpretation, and maybe the most startling one, ancient Chinese Mongols.
Okay.
They point to descriptions of them as tall, blue-eyed, fair-haired, bearded Caucasians, completely unlike modern Mongoloid groups.
So who were they, according to Fomenko?
Russians, basically, or Great Ones, playing on the word Mongol, maybe meaning great in Russian. This really raises a huge question, doesn't it? How could descriptions be so different if the conventional history is right?
It definitely challenges basic assumptions. Which brings us to the Great Wall, probably the most tangible symbol they reinterpret.
Exactly. The standard story. Started 3rd century BC, Emperor Shi Huangdi, built over almost 2,000 years, defense against northern nomads. We all know it.
But Fomenko and Nosovskiy say...
They say, hold on. A defensive structure built over 2 millennia. Wouldn't it become obsolete? Wouldn't the threats change? Wouldn't parts need demolition, not just endless repair?
That's a practical point, I suppose.
And crucially, they argue it couldn't have been built before the 15th century AD.
Why so late?
Because in their timeline, remember, early Chinese history was happening in Europe. And second, they claim it wasn't built against spears and arrows.
No, then what?
Firearms, cannons, siege weapons, technology that really only became prominent around the 15th century. They even note it was sometimes called the Wall of Gog and Magog.
Okay, so later date, different purpose. What was its purpose then, in their view?
A political border, plain and simple, between China and Russia, which they call Mongol Tartary.
A border. What's the evidence for that?
Maps. They point to 17th and 18th century European maps from cartographers like Delisle, Palaret, the Blow Atlases.
And what do these maps show?
They show the Great Wall running exactly along the political border drawn between China Propria and Tartary or Russia, meticulously drawn right on the line. Their argument is, why would sophisticated cartographers draw it like that right on the border unless it was the border at that time?
It implies, if they're right, that ancient builders somehow predicted a border that wouldn't exist for nearly 2,000 years.
Exactly. They'd need staggering prophetic talents, as Fomenko puts it.
So when did they think it was built?
Probably between 1650 and 1689. This lines up with border disputes between Russia and China and the Treaty of Nerchinsk in 1689. Maybe Emperor Kangxi built it around 1684 as a boundary marker, a chain of forts.
But the wall looks ancient and formidable.
Well, they point to an early 18th century engraving by someone called Ides. It shows the wall looking more like a thin stone fence with wide open passages, useless militarily, they say.
So the massive wall we see today.
Might be a much more recent reconstruction, maybe even from Mao's era, partly for tourism, more symbolic or rebuilt later.
Wow. Okay, so if ancient China wasn't where we think, and the wall is much younger, what about the name China itself?
Ah, another fascinating linguistic twist. They look at Afanasy Nikitin, a 15th century Russian traveler.
Okay.
In his journal, Journey Beyond Three Seas, Nikitin writes, the way from China to Cathay takes 6 months of walk by land.
Wait. China to Cathay, implying they're different places.
That's exactly how Fomenko reads it.
Yeah.
2 distinct countries in the 15th century. And they argue that for Nikitin, Cathay likely meant Russia, or its eastern part.
Why Russia?
Because just before that line, Nikitin says, it's Russia that I'm going to, and they point to 17th century maps again.
What do those show?
Maps like the Blue Atlas show Cathay or Kitaysko, located way up in Siberia, the Russian Far East, far from modern China, sometimes labeled near Tartarian Caucasians.
Cathay in Siberia?
Yeah. They even suggest Moscow's Kitay-Gorod, a historic district, might be a linguistic fossil of this. And they note the word Kitay only entered Russian after the 17th century. Before that, the region was called the Bogdoi Kingdom.
So where does Peking or Beijing fit in?
They even suggest Peking might come from the Russian word pegi, meaning piebald or mottled, possibly linked to the Pagaya horde, a name for lands across the Amur River.
Suggesting Beijing was a Russian horde capital.
It's a possibility they raise, contrasting it with earlier supposed capitals like Ji or Khanbalik, which means White Khan City.
This just keeps getting deeper. What about religion? You mentioned Christian baptism briefly.
Right. The theory goes further, suggesting Christianity was actually widespread in China until maybe the 18th century.
Widespread Christianity. Then what happened?
Supplanted by Buddhism, they argue. They cite things like Christian frescoes found under later Buddhist paintwork. And an interesting side note, they claim Manichaeans in China started to pretend to be Buddhists.
And they connect this to other historical figures.
They make a really speculative leap, suggesting the famous 10th century scholar Al-Biruni might actually be an alias for the 16th century chronologist Cesar Baronio, because both produced massive chronological works.
Al-Biruni as Baronio. That's bold.
Very. It's all part of this radical restructuring.
And how does this affect their view of China's later, more established dynasties? Like Yan, Ming, Qing.
They see them all as having similar Mongolian roots. Even Manchurian, they say, is just a variant of Mangol or Mongol.
So Yan, Ming, Qing, all Mongol related.
In their interpretation, yes. They argue the Manchurian era, starting 17th century, is when trustworthy history for China in its current location actually begins.
And they back this up how?
Partly by claiming no verifiable Chinese manuscripts exist from before the 17th century AD.
No manuscripts before the 1600s. That seems unlikely.
It's a controversial claim, definitely part of their argument. And remember the old European name for China, the Land of the Series?
Vaguely, yes. Land of Silk.
Fomenko interprets Series as related to Russes, or Russians. SRRS, suggesting China was originally part of this vast, great Russian Hordian empire.
So Russia ruled China.
That's the implication. They say it was only in the 16th century that Series started being identified with modern China.
Okay, this is a completely different map of world history. Let's get into the how. How do Fomenko and Nosovskiy actually arrive at these conclusions? What are their methods?
Right. The methodology is crucial. They use a few key techniques, mostly mathematical or statistical.
Come from their background. Makes sense.
One is statistical correlation of texts. They basically quantify historical narratives.
Quantify narratives, how?
By measuring how much space pages lines is devoted to describing events in specific years. Then they compare these patterns across different chronicles.
And what do they find?
They claim high correlations between texts describing periods separated by centuries, like ancient Rome and medieval Rome. They say this proves the texts are describing the same events, just dated differently.
So statistical echoes across time.
That's the idea. They do something similar with ruling dynasties. Statistical correlation of dynasties.
How does that work?
Comparing lists of rulers based on things like how long they ruled, how they died, key events in their reigns. They claim statistically significant overlaps between dynasties you wouldn't think are related, like kings of Israel and Roman emperors.
Israelite kings matching Roman emperors. Statistically.
According to their analysis, yes. Another big one is astronomical evidence.
Okay, astronomy feels more concrete.
They recalculate the dates of ancient astronomical events using modern computing. Things like the star positions in Ptolemy's Almagest catalog, Egyptian zodiacs like the ones at Dendera, eclipses reported by Thucydides.
And their calculations give different dates?
Yes, much later dates, medieval dates usually. They argue the original dating was wrong or based on flawed assumptions. They also question the reliability of Chinese astronomical records too.
So statistics, dynasty patterns, and redating the stars. That's the toolkit.
Broadly, yes. That's how they build their case for these duplicates and the radically shortened timeline.
Okay, so we have this complex, mathematically driven theory that rewrites pretty much everything. What does the academic world make of it all? How's it been received?
Well, the short answer is not well.
Not well.
It's universally rejected by mainstream historians, archaeologists, linguists, astronomers, pretty much everyone in the relevant fields. It's widely labeled as pseudoscience.
Universally rejected. Why? What are the main criticisms?
There are many. A major one targets their methods. Critics accuse Fomenko of manipulating the data.
Manipulating how?
By being highly selective. Selective parsing and blending, forcing the data, basically, picking rulers or events that fit the pattern they want to see and ignoring vast amounts of information that doesn't fit.
Like comparing Jesus and Pope Gregory VII, but ignoring all the differences.
Exactly. Critics say this makes the theory an ad hoc hypothesis. It's built specifically to fit the chosen data, and you can't independently replicate their results because the selection criteria seem arbitrary.
What about the astronomy? That sounded more objective.
Critics say that's selective too. Fomenko might highlight a few eclipses or star positions that fit his model, but ignores huge bodies of data like Babylonian astronomical diaries, which consistently match conventional chronology that contradict him.
So cherry-picking the data.
That's the accusation. And then there's his rejection of standard dating methods.
Like carbon dating?
Carbon-14, archaeology, dendrochronology, tree rings, paleography, studying old handwriting, numismatics, coins. Fomenko dismisses them all as inexact, contradictory, or easily manipulated by historians plotting to uphold the false chronology.
But aren't those methods pretty established?
Mainstream science says yes. They argue these methods have been rigorously tested and refined for decades. Dendrochronology, for instance, provides a continuous timeline going back over 12,000 years, and it aligns well with radiocarbon dates. Coin dating is also considered very reliable in many contexts.
So it boils down to Fomenko rejecting the standard tools historians use.
Pretty much. And underlying all this is the implication of a massive conspiracy.
A conspiracy?
Yeah, the theory basically requires a deliberate, coordinated effort, probably in the 16th, 18th centuries, to falsify almost all of world history before 1600. Destroying inconvenient documents, fabricating others, all for political reasons, mainly by European powers.
That's a huge claim. Has it gained any traction anywhere?
It has some notable followers like Garry Kasparov, the chess grandmaster who wrote about it, but in academic circles, no. Russian critics tend to call it an embarrassment. Some Western critics link it to certain modern Russian political ideologies, like a renewed imperial idea. It even won an anti-prize for esteemed nonsense.
Esteemed nonsense. Wow. So this deep dive has definitely shown us a radical alternative picture. It flips our whole understanding of Chinese history, European history, even the Great Wall, completely on its head.
It really does. It challenges the very foundations of how we date the past.
And it raises a really important question for you, the listener. When you're faced with such profoundly different stories about the past, how do you decide what might have actually happened? What tools, what critical thinking do you rely on to evaluate claims like these?
It forces you to think about the nature of historical evidence itself.
Absolutely. And consider the impact if something like this were true. What would such a fundamental rewrite mean? not just for ancient history books, but for our sense of global connections, national identity, even what historical truth is. What might that mean for how we see ourselves right now in the present?